And Gary, or Mr. Hembree, used to bring the kids to the bus stop every morning. They were never unattended. Gary always stayed with the children in the morning and then waited for them in the afternoon as well. I believe that is when I met him. Mr. Woodward was his daughter, I believe, was at the same bus stop as mine and Gary's children.
Okay. And so that would have been shortly after you had moved in?
Yes, sir.
Do you see that William Theodore Woodward in court here today?
I do.
All right, can you point to him, describe what he's wearing?
He's over there. I would say green suit, blue tie.
Okay. What color hair?
Silver.
All right. And which end of the table? There's three gentlemen over at that table.
Far left.
Your left, my right.
Yes.
All right, let the record reflect the witnesses identified the defendant. I want to talk to you about issues that came up. And I want to focus on Mr. Hembree and Mr. Woodward. So let's start with, what was your typical weekday activity? What was your schedule like during the week?
We had 6 children in the home. 5 were Gary and I's, and we also had a roommate, Roger. His girlfriend had a son as well. So we had 6 full-time children in the house.
Okay.
So I worked all week. I would get up with the children, and I kind of got first shift. I guess middle school goes to school different time than the elementary school. So I got the older kids ready in the morning and then got myself ready for work. Stood and waited by the bus stop if Gary wasn't out there, or we would both wait. And I worked 2 blocks from the home. So then I would go to
What were your typical hours?
My first appointment I would take at 9 a.m. And I was home when my last appointment ended. Sometimes it was 1, sometimes it was 5. It would depend.
Okay. All right. And would that be a fairly typical routine, or would you be home during the weekdays?
No, I usually wasn't home during the weekdays. If I was, it was an early day, or an appointment didn't show up, or they canceled.
All right. I want to talk about an incident, and I want to know whether or not you were present or learned about it after the fact, because we aren't going to talk about what you learned, okay?
Okay.
Did you become aware of an incident where law enforcement was summoned by Mr. Woodward, and they came over to your residence and made accusations about a gift or present or some item that was on the porch of the Woodward residence? And that would have been early August, like around the 4th.
I was made aware of that, yes.
Okay. You were not present for anything that happened?
I was not present for the officers talking to Mr. Hembree.
Okay. All right. So now let me ask it this way. Had you already moved into the residence by the time that event happened?
Yes.
You recall how long you'd been there?
School ended in May. All of our children went to the other parents. So I had 2 weeks that we were alone. I'm going to say the beginning of What comes before August?
Well, there's June, July, and August.
July.
Okay.
Sorry. Backwards is hard.
All right. Now, I want to talk about another incident. Were you present for an incident where there was an issue about some chickens and that was between Mr. Woodward and Gary Hembree?
I'm not aware of anything with the chickens with Mr. Hembree and Mr. Woodward.
Okay. So let me ask it another way. Are you aware of an incident where Mr. Woodward asked Mr. Hembree to fight him in the street?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And do you not associate that with chickens?
No, sir.
Okay. Were you present when that happened?
Mention of the chickens, no.
Okay.
But the incident, yes.
Okay. And that's what I'm asking is, you were home, you weren't at work?
No, I was home.
All right. Now, where were you located when you became aware of an issue?
I had heard the shouting, and I kind of let it go for a couple minutes because it had been kind of a routine thing. And when the shouting didn't stop and I heard the Blakes from next door, I heard their voices as well, I then went outside.
All right. Now, do you have a sense of when this is in relation to the incident involving the gift and law enforcement coming over with Mr.
I couldn't tell you.
You recognize where you resided, where the Woodwards live, where the Blakes live?
Yes, sir.
All right. Can you show us where you were residing at that time?
Right there.
Okay. And the Woodwards
There.
and the Blakes?
That one.
Now, this incident that you heard, where did you hear the sounds coming from before you went out and saw where people were? Where did you hear it?
I was in the kitchen washing dishes, and there's a window, a full-size window directly out looking to the street, right?
Which street?
This street. It looks at the tree. It's actually on this side of this tree, and it looks out at this road.
So that's Smith Drive?
Yes, sir.
All right. And so what did you see?
At that point, I really didn't see very much. I was hearing it because the window was open.
All right. Did you go outside?
Yes, I did.
And where did you go?
I went out the carport, which is right here, and I came directly down the driveway, which is out to the street. And they were, it was Mr. Hembree, Mr. Picior, the Blakes, and Mr. Woodward was actually, when I came out, he had been walking the intersection, so I don't know which way he came from.
Okay. Well, where was he when you got out?
He was like moving this way toward my residence.
Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show State's Exhibit 35. Are you able to see that?
Yes, sir.
Do you recognize it?
Yes, sir.
And is your residence visible in this image?
Yes, it is.
Show us where that is.
It's right here.
All right. So you recognize the scene, and what I'm asking is you're describing that you walked down the driveway. So show us where you walked down to.
I was at the sink behind this window. I walked out the carport, which is right here. And I can't tell you distance, but I know that Mr. Hembree, Mr. Picior, and the Blakes were in a little piece of grass in between the two driveways.
Okay.
And Mr. Woodward was coming this way. I don't know which direction he came from, but he was moving in this direction.
And what was the communication like? And I'm talking about, was it friendly, unfriendly?
It was very hostile.
Okay. And who was being hostile to whom?
Honestly, I heard more of Mr. Picior screaming profanities.
Okay.
His girlfriend was screaming for him to get inside the residence and leave it alone. And Mr. Woodward was yelling back at Roger and Gary.
Okay. And do you recall what he was saying to Gary?
I do not.
All right. Did the situation diffuse or escalate?
It escalated.
And what happened?
A couple threats were made toward Mr. Hembree.
Why?
Mr. Picior then made a remark about Mr. Hembree having a disability and that he should pick on Mr. Picior. And I was trying to get both men's attention and get them inside. That wasn't happening. Mr. Woodward was they were going back and forth with threats and comments, hurtful things, like children. And I started yelling at one point.
Okay. And who were you yelling at?
Mr. Woodward.
Okay. Now, has Mr. Woodward where's Mr. Woodward while this is happening?
He was in the middle of Smith Drive.
I'm going to show you what's been marked as State Exhibit 5. Does that image include the area where everybody was?
Yes, sir.
All right. So where was Mr. Hembree, Mr. Picior, Mr. Blake?
I don't know where the Blakes were. They were behind me.
Okay. Where were you and the people you know? Where were you located?
We were in this area, I want to say. Close to the road, but not on it.
Okay. And so you say there were there threats or were there name calling or both?
Both.
All right. Do you have a recollection of what Mr. Woodward said to Mr. Hembree and whoever else?
He referred to our children with the N-word, and he also expressed he was going to disembowel our children.
Okay.
That was when I decided I just started yelling back.
All right. Now, what was Mr. Hembree saying?
Honestly, I couldn't tell you.
What was Mr. Picior saying? For?
He usually has said the same horrible things.
Okay. Now, how long is it daylight while this is happening?
It was either right before or right after dinner because I was at the sink doing dishes.
Okay. Was the sun up? Was still up?
Yes, it was.
How long did this go on?
It was a very heated argument. Mr. Woodward had turned around and gone back to his property once or twice, I believe.
Okay.
And then it got heated and he came back.
All right. Now, how did this situation end?
Police were called.
Now, do you know who called them?
I don't.
Was it still light by the time law enforcement got there?
Yes, sir.
Now, did the law enforcement's arrival and did that settle the issues or not? In other words, did that resolve things?
I don't remember.
And I guess I'm asking a bad question. So the police arrived. I'm assuming everybody went to their residences and the situation ended at that point?
The, 2 police cars responded, if I'm not mistaken, and they kept us separated.
Okay.
The rest of the night was calm that night.
Okay. Now, did things stay calm after that, or was there more issues between Mr. Woodward and the people that you've described?
I worked during the day. When I was home, yes.
All right. Let me ask this. Was Mr. Hembree working at that time?
No.
All right. Was Mr. Picior working at that time?
No, sir.
Was Mr. Blake working at that time?
I do not know that.
Okay, fair enough. Do you know if Mr. Woodward was working at that time?
That I don't know either.
Okay, fair enough. So, I don't want to deal with what you heard when you got back. What I'm
Right.
interested in is, from what you viewed, did matters calm down between the neighbors, or did they continue at the level you just described to us?
It continued.
How long did this go on? And I'm talking about, was it days, weeks?
Weeks.
Was there a point in time where you decided to seek an injunction against Mr. Woodward?
Yes, sir.
All right. Now, did you learn that Mr. Woodward sought an injunction against you and the people in your residence?
Yes, sir.
And did that flow from the problems that had continued between the neighbors? Did both those things, those requests for injunctions, did that flow from the continuation of the bad blood, ill will between the neighbors?
Yes, sir.
Did you attend a hearing in front of Judge Moxley concerning those injunctions?
Yes, I did.
And who else was present?
Bruce, Carrie Blake, Roger Picior, Gary Hembree, and myself.
Okay. What about Mr. Woodward and his family? And
Yes, Mr. Woodward was there, and I don't remember his wife's name. Mr. Woodward's wife, and I believe it was his mom and dad.
okay. Were other people there as well?
The officers that responded, like the frequent ones that responded.
Okay. How would you describe this hearing in front of Judge Moxley?
It was tense. It was emotional. Both Gary and Mr. Woodward were visibly upset. Tears, their voices were shaken. They were very upset.
Now, at the end of the hearing, did Judge Moxley grant any of the injunctions that had been sought? The one you were asking against the Woodwards, or the one the Woodwards were asking against you, or the one Carrie Blake was asking against the Woodwards?
None of us got one.
All right. Now, how did, emotionally, where were you at the end of that hearing?
I was exhausted.
Do you remember where you went after the hearing?
Directly after the hearing, I went to the ladies' room.
Okay. And why'd you do that?
I had gotten mascara in my eyes. I was trying to get it out.
And had you met someone that Gary recognized while you were at the courthouse that tried to help?
Yes, sir. It was one of the deputies that is in the courtroom. She recognized Gary from, I guess, when they were younger. School is what I remember.
Okay. And so, as a result of you dealing with your issues, were you able to leave right away?
No, we weren't.
All right. How long do you think you were trying to get this situation squared away?
I would say about 10 minutes.
Okay. And were you upset at the time while you're trying to deal with this?
Yes, I was. I was trying to get home. The children's bus was it was early release day, and the children were going to be dropped off at the bus stop, and Gary and I were not there.
Okay. So, you come out of the restroom?
Yes.
All right. And what happens?
I met with Gary, and we walked together out the front door. My car was parked, like, right in front of the courthouse. So all I had to do was cross the road, and my car was parked in the first parking spaces.
Let me show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 99. Is the car you're talking about visible in that image?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so is that the black automobile we're seeing?
Yes, it is.
Ladies and gentlemen, the evidence that you are about to receive concerning other crimes, wrongs, or acts allegedly committed by the defendant will be considered by you for the limited purpose of proving motive, intent, or ill will, and you shall consider it only as it relates to those issues. However, the defendant is not on trial for a crime, wrong, or act that is not included in the indictment. You may proceed.
Thank you. Ms. Sillsbury, I want to ask when this hearing happened in relation to a Labor Day party that this subsequent incident happens at. When is this hearing with Judge Moxley?
It was on a Wednesday.
And was it the Wednesday before the weekend this happened?
Yes, sir.
And I think when we stopped and took a break with the judge, we'd gotten to where your automobile was parked outside the courthouse in Titusville.
Yes, sir.
And at that point in time, where did you go? Were you with Mr. Hembree?
Yes, I was.
All right. Was anybody else with you at that time?
No, sir.
And the court deputy that you'd met, was the court deputy with you after you left the courthouse?
She said goodbye to Gary, I want to say a second step, okay. And then she turned around and went back in.
All right. So what did you have to do to get to your automobile from there?
There were a couple steps, a sidewalk, and then a narrow road, another sidewalk, and then the parking lot.
Okay. And did you go to your car?
I went directly to the passenger side of my car.
All right. And were you going to be the passenger, or were you going to be the driver?
I don't recall,
Okay, fair enough.
but that was the door I had to open with the key to that door.
And did anything happen while you were at your car?
Yes, I leaned in to unlock the driver's side door for Mr. Hembree, and I was lighting a cigarette, and I don't remember which was first or second, but it was all at the same time.
Okay. And so you're in the process of getting into your car, and does anything happen?
I looked up when Mr. Hembree opened up the driver's side door, and through the window, I saw Mr. Woodward coming out of the courthouse,
Okay.
the same way we did.
All right. And so they're across the street at this point.
Yes, sir.
Do you recall who was with Mr. Woodward?
At that point, no.
All right. And what happened after that?
I alerted Gary. I said, Gary, turn around. He's right behind you. And he hadn't crossed the street yet. He was still on the sidewalk, on the courthouse sidewalk side. And he pointed at myself and Gary and said, are you prepared to die?
Okay. And by he, who are you referring to?
Mr. Woodward.
Person you earlier identified?
Yes, sir.
And then what happened?
He then walked he was very quick across the street, and he assaulted Gary.
Right. Rather than saying assaulted, what did you see him do?
Stick his thumbs in his eyeballs.
Okay. And what was Mr. Hembree doing while this is
He
happening?
was trying to push him off
And where is this happening?
on the driver's side of my car.
All right. And is it right next to your car, away from the car? How close?
In the beginning, it was right next to my car.
Okay. So this has occurred. What happens after the initial contact that you're observing?
I realized that Mr. Woodward's father and mother were present with him, and wife were present with him at that moment. Everybody was screaming for the guys to get to separate.
Okay. So did that include you?
I was in the middle of it.
Okay. So get us from where you are, because when the last time we heard where you were, you're in the passenger side of the automobile?
Yeah.
All right. Did you stay in? Did you get out of the car? What'd you do?
I was just bent in the passenger side. I hadn't gotten into the vehicle. So when I saw Mr. Woodward approaching quickly, I let Mr. Hembree know and told him to get his phone out as quickly as he possibly could so we could record the threats. And as I was yelling at Gary, I was getting to that side of the car.
All right. So are you on that side of the car when Mr. Woodward grabs or touches Mr. Hembree?
Yes, sir.
And so what he's got a hold of him on his head? Is that what?
He had his thumbs Mr. Woodward had his thumbs in Mr. Hembree's eyes, and his fingers were behind his ears.
Okay.
It was like that.
All right. And all Are they just standing there, or what's happening?
No, Gary was trying to get him off him, and it wasn't working.
All right. And so what happened next?
I had a cigarette in my hand, and I remember jumping on him,
Jumping on who?
Mr. Woodward.
Okay. So did you jump on his back?
I don't remember.
Okay. Did you burn him with the cigarette?
Yes, I did.
Did that stop it?
No, it did not.
What happened after that?
Mr. Woodward's mother or wife, I don't know which one, wound up in the parking lot yelling about and grabbing their chest. And I remember Gary yelling, and I went over. For some reason, I was like in the middle of that. I don't remember why.
You were in the middle of the struggle?
Yes.
All right.
And Mr. Woodward's father moved me onto the ground in the parking lot.
So he pulled you out?
Yes,
Pulled
he
you
did.
off?
Yes.
All right. And what happened after that?
Somebody driving by came out with a can of mace or pepper spray and sprayed everybody.
Okay. Did that stop it?
I believe so.
Did you return to your residence after that incident had concluded and you communicated with the people you needed to communicate with?
Yes, sir.
And was Mr. Woodward back at his residence as well?
He had been there before us.
Okay. Did the relationship between Mr. Hembree and Mr. Woodward get any better than it had at that particular point where this incident happens there at the courthouse?
No, sir.
So that's Wednesday, then you've got Thursday and Friday. And how are things in the neighborhood?
Mr. Woodward would take his dog for a walk 3 times, I can say, when I was home. At least 3 times I witnessed every day. And he would walk his dog directly in front of our home all 3 times.
Now, do you remember what day of the week you had a barbecue, a get-together at your residence?
I want to say it was Sunday.
Okay. So, 4 days later,
Yes, sir.
and do you know what time the barbecue began?
Close to dinner time, a little bit after 5.
Sun still up?
Yes.
All right, and who came to the barbecue?
It was myself, my 15-year-old son,
What's his name?
Devin Catallo, Mr. Hembree, Mr. Hembree's oldest son, Zachary Hembree, Bruce and Carrie Blake, and their 2 daughters. I don't remember their names. Crystal is one of them.
Okay. How old were they?
I don't remember. Oh, and Mr. Picior and his girlfriend and their son, Daniel, and Mr. Picior's oldest son, Justin.
Okay. So there were 2 sons,
Yes.
Daniel and Justin?
Yes, sir.
during this get-together, was there words or things said in the direction of the Woodward residence while you were present?
No,
Okay.
I wasn't present for any yet.
Okay. And I'm talking about this is during the daytime, right?
Right.
Was there alcohol served?
Yes, sir.
All right. Were people getting impaired?
Yes, sir.
After it got dark, was anyone from the group you were with saying anything about the Woodwards or to the Woodward residents?
Yes, sir.
Now, did you become aware, or were you aware, that there was a surveillance video recording system over at the Woodwards?
I was.
How long before this get-together had you been aware of it?
A couple weeks.
Did all the adults at the party, and I'm talking about the Blakes, Mr. Picior, Gary Hembree, did all of them know about this surveillance system?
Yes, sir.
Did you, or were you aware that people would go down the street and moon or show their behinds towards the camera, towards the Woodward residence? Were you aware of that happening?
I was aware of the boys pulling their pants down. They were not in the street. They were in our yard.
Were you, so that's something you witnessed?
Yes, it did.
Right. Were you aware of of something being burned right at the street of your residence?
I was not.
You were not? Okay. Do you remember how impaired you'd gotten by towards the end when this incident happened? How impaired had you gotten?
I had stopped drinking.
Okay. Do you think it would have been safe for you to operate a motor vehicle with the amount of alcohol you had consumed?
No, sir.
Okay. How about Mr. Blake? Did you observe him?
Not really.
Okay. And the reason I'm asking is I wanted to know if you'd formed an opinion about how impaired by alcohol he was.
Oh, yeah. Yes. He was impaired.
Do you think he was more impaired, less impaired, the same as you?
The same?
All right. How about Mr. Picior? Had you observed him, and did you form any impressions about his level of impairment towards the end of the evening before he was killed?
He was definitely impaired.
And then Gary Hembree, same question.
Yes, he was impaired as well.
Had any of you gotten so impaired it affected your ability to walk?
No.
Okay. So at least from the observations you made, people were able to walk without stumbling or falling down or things like that.
I witnessed some stumbling.
Okay. All right. So people were impaired to the point where they were stumbling.
Yes, sir.
Did you become aware of a vehicle that Justin Picior had arrived in, a truck that was parked between your residence and the Blake residence at the street?
I was.
Do you recall whether or not that truck left while this gathering was happening and then subsequently came back sometime later?
Yes, it did.
Okay. Do you remember who left?
I do not.
Now, I want to go deal with what's going on before you go inside for the last time before the shooting happened. So I want you to tell us what you're seeing happening out in the front yard area between the Blake and your residence.
I was gathering food and emptying less filled containers into more filled containers, trying to consolidate food. It was on a section between the Blakes and my residence, under a tarp canopy thing.
Okay.
At that point, I had Roger Picior's son, Justin, pulled up in that vehicle that you just said, the little red pickup truck.
Okay.
That's kind of when I noticed it, was right before we went inside.
Okay.
Was
So you're picking up, and I believe, let me see. You recognize that image?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Does that image include the area where you were talking about cleaning up?
Yes, sir.
Can you show us?
Right there.
Okay. Now, you're outside doing that. You observed this pickup truck pull up with Mr. Picior, Justin?
Yes, Justin and a friend or two. I don't recollect.
Okay. And did you know whose truck that was at the time?
At the time I did.
All right, don't remember now.
No.
Fair enough. Now I want to ask about, so you saw Justin. What about everybody else? Do you remember where they were? I can move this around. Do you remember if anybody else was outside besides you and that truck?
Yes. My son, Devin Catallo, and Justin and the boys that were in that vehicle were all, handshaking, hugs. They were all saying hi to each other.
Okay.
And Mr. Picior was standing in about this area, kind of saying hi to everybody too.
Okay. And you remember where Mr. Blake was?
I do not.
Do you remember where Mr. Hembree was?
I do not.
Now, is this the last time you're out before the shooting occurs?
Yes, sir.
And so you go inside, and what are you doing?
I was bringing food inside.
All right. And did you eventually get it all in where you're inside?
No, I didn't. Gary and I had, Gary had barbecue sauce on his face and his hands. And so I had just bought a new bedspread and pillow shams, and he was going to wipe his face all over them. So he ran back to our bedroom and playing around. And I was trying to make sure he didn't wipe the barbecue sauce all over the new bedspread.
Okay. Now, do you have a sense of time of how long you've been in the residence and these things are happening? I know it's been a while.
No.
Right. Was there a time where you're in the residence and Mr. Hembree is still outside?
Earlier in the evening.
Okay. I'm talking about, I'm asking like right now. I'm trying to remember, did you come in the residence and Mr. Hembree's already in there getting ready to wipe his face? Or is he coming in and doing that after you're already inside?
I followed him in.
Okay. Now, you mentioned this particular scene. Is the truck you're referring to in it, the one that Justin showed
I
up?
can't see.
You can't, do you need to step down?
No, like yeah, I can't see.
All right. Would it assist if you came and looked at the image on the view screen?
Yeah.
Okay. With the court's permission, could the witness step down and view the image on the view screen?
You may.
Okay, so you see the truck that you observed Mr. or Justin Picior come up in?
Yes.
Can you show the jury where that is?
Right here.
Okay. And then, is the door that you followed Gary into, is that visible in this image as well?
Yes.
Where's that?
Right there.
Okay. And it looks like there's some steps up to it.
Yes.
You recognize State's Exhibit 40?
Yes, sir.
And do you see the entry door to the residence we were talking about in the preceding exhibit?
Yes, sir.
Can you show us where that is?
Right there.
Now, is this same black car that you took to the courthouse and that incident at the courthouse on the previous Wednesday, is that visible in this image as well?
Yes, it is.
Can you show us where that is?
There.
Now, while you're inside with Mr. Hembree, do you have a sense of what time it is? Do you have a sense of what time of day it is at this particular point in time?
I know it was definitely getting late. And we were paying attention to the time because we had the radio on
Okay.
and we didn't want to get our neighbors mad.
So, do you have a sense of if it's still September 2nd or it's after midnight? Do you have a sense of that?
No.
Now, did something occur while you were in the residence with Mr. Hembree that caused the two of you to go outside?
Yes, sir.
And what happened?
I heard loud banging.
Okay. Did Mr. Hembree react to the banging?
He told me I was silly and it was fireworks.
And what happened after you heard the noises outside?
I jumped up and started to walk. Actually, I was running toward the door to get outside. Both of our sons were out there.
So what was Mr. Hembree doing?
He was stumbling behind me. I just remember him behind me.
Okay. And did you get outside?
Yes, sir, I did.
Now, what did you do?
I was yelling for the boys.
Okay. And where did you look?
When I opened up the door, I actually heard a noise, and it was toward our laundry room.
I'm going to show you what's been marked as Exhibit 6. I'm putting that back on the view screen. Is the area that you heard the noise in?
Behind the window is a room.
Okay. And so you heard a noise as you come out of the door to your left as you're coming out of the house?
Yes, sir.
All right. And so that's the direction that you look?
Yes, sir.
Are you still up on the step or have you come down? Are you aware of Mr. Hembree, where he is?
He was behind me.
And so you, away from the street at this particular time, would that be fair?
Yes, sir.
And so what happens?
I walked toward the laundry room.
Okay.
I went left.
And what happened?
I saw Justin Picior
Okay.
was in there and asked him where my son was.
You asked him what?
I asked him where my son was, if he had seen him.
Okay. So you saw Justin back in this back area around your laundry room?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And what happened after? Did you actually have time to communicate with him?
Yes, I did.
Right. And then what happened?
I turned around and went back toward the door. I thought that Gary was right behind me, but he wasn't. He was still inside the house, in the in the doorway.
Okay. All right, so you're walking back towards Mr. Hembree, and you're heading towards the door that we see in Case Exhibit 40. Right? Looks like green.
Yes.
Okay. And so what happens?
I looked inside the house again. Gary had his arm up on the door, like in the doorway. So he had his arm up, and he was very tall. And I looked under his arm, yelled for the boys again inside the house. Nobody answered. I turned around to go back outside, and that was when Gary actually came out of the house behind me.
All right. Now, while you're doing these things, have you heard any more sounds like you'd heard that were inside the house?
I was hearing gunshots, yes.
So you were hearing that as you're wandering around the carport area?
Yes, sir.
When you walk back down the stairs, the steps, do you have a sense of where Mr. Hembree is?
He had grabbed the back of my shirt.
Okay. So he's behind you,
Directly behind me.
and what happens?
The door swung open and blocked my view to the street.
Okay, this is an out opening door.
Yes, sir.
So when the door opens, you can't see the street.
No.
And what happens after that?
I remember hearing more gunshots, and Gary, I don't know whether he fell on me. His body weight was on me, and I was under the car. I was either crawling or he pushed me. I'm not sure. Either way, that's where I wound up, was under my car.
Okay. And I'm going back to Exhibit 6 again, the picture. Is the area where you and Gary are located visible in this image?
Yes, sir.
Can you show us where you are at this time?
Actually, that's really bad. I can't even see the steps.
Showing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 107. You recognize the scene in that image?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And can you show us where you were as this incident is unfolding, and where you ended up and where Mr. Hembree ended up?
Mr. Hembree ended up right where he is.
Okay, that's Mr. Hembree right there?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And you are the steps that you've been talking about visible in this particular image?
Yes, sir.
All right. And so tell us again, you hear some gunshots,
Yes, sir.
and then you feel Mr. Hembree,
Yes.
and then what happens? Do you fall down? What happens?
I remember my knees buckled. I was underneath the car behind Mr. Hembree's head.
Okay, I'm going to show another angle of the same type of image. I think you've seen this before.
Yes, sir.
And what I'm doing is trying to orient where you're located in relation to Mr. Hembree.
Okay.
Can you see that?
Yes, sir.
All right. Now, Mr. Hembree's on the ground right next to your car. Is that fair?
Yes.
Where are you located?
I'm behind the tire, right here.
And you're under the car?
I was under the car. My belly was on the ground.
Now, do you become aware of what's going on around you as you're under this car?
My ears were ringing, and I still hadn't seen any of the boys' feet from where I was, so I was trying to get out the other side of the car.
All right. Are you hearing anything?
Like I said, my ears were ringing. I was hearing gunshots, but my ears were ringing.
Okay. Are you seeing anything that you're associating with the gunshots?
Yeah, I saw Mr. Woodward's feet come around the back tire of my car.
Okay. And what I'd like to, when you're describing that, what direction are you seeing the feet come from and head?
The feet picked up in the corner. I don't know which way he came from. That was when I saw him.
Right. I don't want you to guess. I want you to tell us, where is it you saw some feet?
I saw feet at the back tire back here.
Okay. And what direction did the feet go?
Toward Gary.
And are you still under this car near the tire?
Yes, sir.
And what happens as
He was shooting.
and are you able to appreciate how many times he's shooting?
No.
Are you seeing what's happening to Gary from this?
Yes.
And what do you see?
His body was moving every time a bullet hit him.
Okay. And were you under there for the rest of the gunshots?
No, sir.
Okay. Do you need to take a break?
No, okay.
So you see the feet come and the shots happen. What happens after that?
I looked up. From underneath the car, I could see Mr. Woodward's face.
Where is he?
He was standing over Gary.
All right. And what happened after that?
I was just thinking about where my son was. I was trying to get out the other side of the car.
Right. Did there come a point in time where you recognized that the shooting had stopped, or did it keep going on after this?
I don't remember.
Okay. Did you get out from under the car?
Yes, sir.
When you got out from under the car, were you able to see Mr. Woodward anymore?
No.
Do you remember if either of the windows were down in your automobile?
I don't.
Okay. You know what I'm asking you? The front passenger and the driver's side windows, do you remember if those were down and you don't?
I don't remember.
Okay. Do you remember the condition of your automobile before the shooting happened?
Yes, sir.
I'm going to show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 109. First, do you recognize that as your automobile?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And before the shooting happened, was the back window in your automobile intact?
Yes, sir.
Let me have this. Mark on the passenger side, rear passenger side of your automobile. It's been identified as a bullet hole. Was that hole there before this incident happened?
No, sir.
Okay. Was your car undamaged by any type of firearms or projectiles?
Yeah.
In other words, was there any pre-existing damage from gunshots?
No.
All
No.
right. Was there any shell casings that were spent shell casings that were in your car the last time you parked it in that spot before the shooting happened?
No, sir.
Do you recall how long it was? Well, let me ask this. When you got out from under the car, did you recognize at some point the police arriving to the scene?
Yes, sir.
Do you recall how long it was? And I know you don't have a watch on, but do you have a sense of if it was fairly quick or it took a while?
It was fairly quick.
Had you seen law enforcement driving by your residence earlier in the evening prior to this incident happening?
A couple times, yes.
Did you see Mr. Woodward having contact with law enforcement after they arrived? In other words, did you see him in contact or custody with law enforcement?
The last time I saw Mr. Woodward, he was laying face down in the street on Smith Drive.
Was a police officer there with him?
They just pulled up. They weren't out of their vehicles yet. The officers were not out of their vehicles yet.
Now, I'm assuming you were very emotional at the time?
Yes, sir.
Did you attempt to convey to the officer what had happened? Or do you remember?
I remember yelling because my ears were still ringing. And I remember walking up to as many people as was coming to the crime scene and asking them if Gary was okay, asking them different, I don't remember what I was asking. I remember asking a couple times if Gary was okay.
Now, I want to talk to you about the last time you saw Gary in the house before he's pulling on your shirt and coming out with you. The last time that you saw him, did you see whether or not he had anything in his hands at all?
He had a cup in his hand, a mug.
All right, like a coffee mug?
Yes, sir.
That was it?
That was it.
Now, this residence that you're at, that we've been talking about, and there's still an image of it up on the view screen right now, is that in Brevard County, Florida?
Yes.
I don't have any other questions.
You come into my yard. Isn't that true?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And Mr. Picior is saying, if you want to fight somebody, fight me, not Mr. Hembree. Right?
Yes, sir.
And so he was getting in, and he was offering to stand in for Mr. Hembree in this fight.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And Carrie Blake was coming out, and she was also yelling and saying, yeah, come, fight me. Come into our yard, fight me. Correct?
I remember her shouting. I don't remember what she was shouting.
Okay. Now, you all made a claim that Mr. Woodward lifted up his shirt at this point and you could see a gun. Isn't that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And Mr. Woodward and his family and the Crows disputed that he had a gun, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So basically it was your group accusing Mr. Woodward of something, and Mr. Woodward and the other neighbors saying that it was a false accusation, correct?
Yes, sir.
There were no threats to disembowel anyone, much less your children, on September 5th, was there?
I remember that is exactly what was said.
Oh, well, let me see if I can refresh your recollection. Do you recall writing out a sworn statement to the police?
Actually, I don't.
Well, may I judge?
You may.
That's your signature on this statement on September 5th about this incident?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Isn't it a fact that no one... Correct?
Yes, sir.
And there's nothing in there at all from you about any threats against your children, is there?
No, there is not.
Now, this is your statement about what happened to the police. I would think that the most important thing to you as a mother is if someone had threatened your children. Wouldn't that be fair?
I was more concerned about the gun.
Oh, and you didn't think it was important to say anything about disemboweling. Is that right?
Both sides were shouting things.
Mm-hmm. Now, after August 5th, there was another incident on August 11th involving your all's gang and the Woodwards, correct?
I don't recall.
Well, do you recall a point in time where you threatened to have Ava Woodward, Mr. Woodward's 12-year-old daughter, kidnapped and raped, and threatened to burn their house while they slept?
I never said that.
You never said that. And do you recall that in response to your statement, Carrie Blake picked up the theme and made threats to hire a big black man to anally rape Ava?
I don't remember that.
You don't remember that?
No.
And do you remember that was in response to your own statements that there was a threat to disembowel you and Carrie?
No. That's not
Let me see
how I
if I can
remember.
refresh your recollection about that one. Copy of portion of your petition for injunction. Isn't it there that you claim, the only time that any threats to disembowel anybody was made, and that's your statement, and you're claiming that that was directed toward you and Carrie in response to threats you had made against the Woodwards?
I guess, yes.
Okay. Well, that's your sworn statement. That's your handwriting, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Okay, that's your signature on the end of that, right?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And this is part of your claim asking for protection from the court, right?
Yes, it is.
Now, does that refresh your recollection about your threats to have Ava Woodward raped?
I would never say that.
You'd never said that.
Nope.
Have you ever seen the video of the surveillance of that?
No, I have not.
Okay. State never showed you any of that. At that point in time, the Woodwards had set up their surveillance, correct?
Yes, sir.
They actually bought and set up the surveillance as a response to your all's false claims that Mr. Woodward was armed on the 5th. So in response to that, to protect their family against more false claims by your group, they put up a surveillance camera. Isn't that true?
I don't know why they put up a surveillance camera.
Well, you certainly were aware of the surveillance camera.
Yeah,
Is that correct?
Yes, I was. It was aimed at my daughter's bedroom windows.
And again, just so I'm clear, no one has ever shown you the video of yours and Kim's threats that were recorded, I'm sorry, yours and Carrie's threats that were recorded on August 11th.
No, sir.
Okay? But certainly, you're claiming that that's not your voice making those threats.
I've never seen it.
And you certainly would never make threats of that nature, would you?
There were a lot of threats made.
Well, let's talk about you making threats to burn the Woodward home while they
I never
slept.
made that threat.
How about your threat to have Ava kidnapped
I didn't make that threat either.
and raped?
That is not what, I do not remember ever saying that.
Now, on August 12th, Barbara Woodward requested you to have your children stop taunting and harassing his children. Do you recall that?
I remember her asking to have the children, I don't remember exactly what she asked me, but I do remember her asking me something about the children.
And your response was you would have your kids harass Ava until she just couldn't function anymore, if that's what it took. Right?
I don't remember that.
Isn't it a fact at this point in time, you, Carrie Blake, Tim Blake, Roger Picior, Jessica Nobles, Gary Hembree, all were working on an almost daily basis to taunt and harass the Woodwards, in particular Billy Woodward, in an attempt to get him to break?
No.
Isn't it in fact that it was your all's belief that because you believed he suffered from PTSD, that he was susceptible to this type of taunting and harassment, and that would cause him to break?
Absolutely not.
Were you aware of the fact that he allegedly had PTSD?
I was aware that he had some problems, but I didn't know in particular what they were.
Any details? Isn't one of the things that your all's group consistently taunted him and harassed him about was his military service and his problems as a result of his military service?
Myself, no.
How about presence?
I don't remember. Both of us were arguing all the time.
Were you present on August 23rd when Roger Picior threatened Mr. Woodward's father with a baseball bat?
I don't remember that.
Now, the state had asked you about the day of the injunction, and you had filed an injunction claiming repeat violence by Mr. Woodward against you. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And the Woodwards had mistakenly filed an injunction for repeat violence instead of stalking for their grounds as an injunction against you. Correct?
I have no idea what they filed for.
Well, you were served with a copy of their injunction, were you not?
Yes, sir.
It was an injunction claiming repeat violence, was it not?
I don't remember.
You may.
Isn't this a copy of the injunction that was served on you?
Don't remember.
Okay. Isn't this an injunction for repeat violence?
That's what it says.
Okay. And essentially what happened, without hearing any evidence, the judge ruled that the injunctions were legally insufficient and denied all of your all's relief, correct?
We were all denied, yes.
And there was no testimony taken. None of the witnesses that were there, none of the video that the Woodwards had brought was looked at by the judge. Basically, the judge just said these petitions are legally insufficient, correct?
I don't remember why he said we didn't get it.
Again, didn't you sign?
You may.
Isn't that the basis of what you all had to sign for at the end of this process, saying it was legally insufficient?
I was instructed to file for a restraining order by law enforcement. Wasn't familiar with it.
I know. That's very interesting. It's not the question I asked you. Isn't the basis of the judge's ruling, which was given to you and you signed for at the end of the process, was that the petitions were legally insufficient?
I don't remember why he didn't
Hold on,
give them.
hold on, ma'am. Hold on. What is the legal basis of an
Asked
objection?
and answered, and calls for hearsay.
Sustained.
Now, it's your claim that after that, if I understood what you were claiming, is that Mr. Woodward just kind of out of the blue ran over toward Mr. Hembree and attacked him. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Isn't it a fact that as soon as Mr. Woodward exited the courthouse, Mr. Hembree reassumed the type of taunting and statements toward him?
Absolutely not.
And it was Mr. Woodward reacting to Mr. Hembree's statements and some of your statements directed toward him that caused the altercation.
No.
As a matter of fact, you got right in the middle of it
Yes,
between
I
the
did.
two of them. And you were yelling and screaming, and part of your efforts in the middle of this burned Mr. Woodward with a cigarette.
I did, yes.
Okay. And then you also got into it with Barbara Woodward and Ann Woodward. You left that after burning Mr. Woodward with a cigarette and then got and confronted them and got in their face. Isn't that true?
No.
And that's when Mr. Woodward Sr. separated you from his wife and daughter-in-law. Isn't that correct?
No.
And it was in the middle of this melee that a bystander basically sprayed you all with mace, which stopped everything.
Yes, sir.
Now, let's move up to, isn't in fact on August 29th, which is actually the day of the injunction hearing, that Mr. Picior, yourself, Gary, and one other, Jessica, I believe, one other unidentified female, were in the street taunting the Woodwards, prompting Lydia Crow, your neighbor, to call the police.
I don't remember that.
Isn't it the fact that after the injunction hearing, you, Mr. Picior, Mr. Hembree, Mr. Blake, and Carrie Blake got into a yelling thing against the neighbors that had been there to testify on behalf of the Woodwards, threatening them, the neighbors?
That's not how I remember it.
Were you present on September 1st involving the incident with Mr. Picior, Roger Picior, and the Woodwards?
I don't remember.
Okay. Well, let's go to September 2nd. You remember the barbecue. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Now, let's talk about the barbecue. Where were you when Tim Blake decided to serenade the Woodward house with his version of the Charlie Daniels song, Simple Man? You recall that?
I don't.
Do you recall him yelling or sing-songing the lyrics, I'd take a big tall tree and a short piece of rope, I'd hang them up high and let them swing till the sun goes down. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, you better watch where you go and remember where you've been. That's the way I see it, I'm a simple man. Because in my house I got a 12-gauge shotgun waiting on the other side. Have to fight? Fight! Just put him on the knees and tie him to the stump and blow him the fuck away. Bang. Recall that?
No, I don't.
Do you recall, well, let's see, you do acknowledge that you were present when two people were mooning the Woodward house, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
What was the purpose of that?
I have no idea.
Just a friendly neighborly gesture?
I had a bunch of kids. I had a bunch of barbecue food and cake and alcohol. I don't know why.
Nothing goes better with barbecue and alcohol than mooning somebody, right?
No.
Well, you certainly didn't do anything. You were right there and you didn't do anything to stop it, did you?
It was already done by the time I had seen it.
You were amused by it. You're sitting there laughing about it, aren't you?
I'm trying to remember.
Were you there around 10 o'clock when several people came down and tried to entice Mr. Woodward out of his home so that it can go down?
No.
No? Yelling at, hey man, it's finally going down. He ain't coming out. He ain't coming out. He's got stinking in his hair. He's got stinking in his ass. Remember that?
No.
Do you remember anybody burning anything that evening?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Were you part of the group that was yelling KKK, white power, burn baby burn?
No.
Who was that?
It was the teenage boys
The teenage boys.
in the red truck. Yes.
And they were doing that as they were burning something in the area directly across from the Woodward house, correct?
No, it was not.
Was not?
It was in the end of our driveway, which is not directly in front of the Woodward house.
What's the purpose of this burn baby burn white power? What was that all about? Why was this being burned, if not
They were
directed toward the
teenage
Woodwards?
boys. I don't know.
Well, you were there, and you certainly didn't do anything to stop that or complain about that, correct?
No.
Are you one of the female voices that's encouraging them?
Actually, no.
Were you one of the female voices that were joining in with these calls of white power?
No. I was.
Were you possibly the person who had said, let's see if I can find, nobody knows you're a racist? Was that your voice or some other female voice?
It must have been someone else.
Do you recall who said that?
Absolutely not.
Okay. Do you recall Jessica Nobles complaining about the fact that her car actually caught some of the collateral damage of this burning? And screaming, it's on fire, and put it out.
I don't remember that.
Let's see if I can refresh your recollection. Do you recognize that?
Yes.
Does that refresh your recollection as to whether or not Jessica Noble's car got stood on it from that you all were burning?
That's not what that's from.
Is that what it's from?
No, it's
Some
not.
other burning incident?
You can see the truck is in disrepair, to say the least, and it's around the gas cap.
Yes. And you're saying that that was not related to Miss Noble screaming at around 12:03:22 on the tape, it's on fire. You can see people stamping out flames.
That's exactly what I'm saying.
Okay. So she's talking about something else that's on fire.
She must have been.
Okay. Now, are you part of the group that is shouting at the Woodward home, "Suck my dick, faggot"? Were you around then?
No.
"Fuck you, dick"?
I don't remember being outside. I remember hearing a lot of that.
A lot of that. Do you know who was doing that?
I do not.
Do you recall people yelling around this time, "I'd love for that cocksucker to come out"?
In exact words, no, I do not recall that.
Do you recall Tim Blake talking about, "If we can get him out and get him to snap, I'll fight him to the death"?
I do not remember that.
"Look how white my knuckles are. I've done it before. I can do it now."
No, I never
Didn't
did
hear that?
No, I did not.
Earlier in the evening, did you hear, this is before Mr. Woodward had come anywhere near your all's property, the shots of sound of gunfire, 4 distinct shots.
Yeah, is that again? Wait.
Earlier in the evening,
Yes.
coming from the area of your all's property, at about 23:40-47, 4 distinct gunshots. Did you hear that?
No, sir.
And I'm going to object speculatory and conclusory about the area of gunshot.
Sustained.
Well, if I'm hearing you, you didn't hear gunshots around that time at all. Is that correct?
We had fireworks.
You had fireworks. Do you recall conversation at or around that time talking about this is going to scare the shit out of them, and talking about your fireworks, is the bomb made?
No.
Okay. That would be about 23:46-40. Now, you said that you were down there at the time that, as you said, the boys mooned the Woodward house. So were you there when there was yelling? Again, you got a flash and burn. Tell them to fuck it while you're at it. Fuck you. Suck my dick during this mooning incident.
When I realized that the boys had mooned anybody, it was already done. And the statements that you just made were, the boys were all wrestling in the front yard and they were yelling at each other, not at the Woodwards.
So these comments that were made, and you can hear them just before they mooned them while they're down by the Woodward house, you're saying aren't related to the mooning incident at all.
It was our front yard where our barbecue was, absolutely, and the boys were arguing amongst themselves because they were wrestling.
Now, you had talked, the state had asked you about alcohol use. Was there also marijuana use that night?
Not that I know of.
Okay. Did you hear people yelling about weed and hold my weed and things of that nature?
The teenage boys, yes. I remember yelling at one of them in particular.
Gary Hembree actually had rolling papers in his pocket. Did you know that?
I was aware, yes.
Okay. Had he been smoking marijuana earlier that evening?
That night, I did not witness him smoking.
Okay. Other people smoking marijuana around there that you're aware of?
No,
Other drug use?
not that I'm aware of.
Okay. So what you were aware of is everybody was intoxicated.
We were all drinking, yes.
Okay. And is that, your intoxication, is that a justification for the way you all were acting toward the Woodwards?
I can't tell you why anybody was acting anyway.
How about you? Can you tell me how you were acting?
Absolutely, I can tell you how I was acting.
Okay? Was your alcohol intoxication your excuse for the way you were acting that night?
I was not acting like anything but a mother having a barbecue that night. And I hear myself reprimanding my children a couple of times.
Now, around 2450, do you recall a conversation amongst, and part of what was said is, I'm going to get a bat, stay here. She's bitching at me to knock the shit out of him. Roger Picior saying, I'm here offering $1. Roger's saying, you just got your ass fucked. In return, you get to shoot him with something that didn't hurt. Roger's saying, you just got your ass whooped. And a woman's voice saying, you can't deny it. You're a threat, Roger, like they claim. Were you present during that?
How you're saying it? Absolutely not.
Okay.
I was present for a discussion kind of like that, but you're taking it out of context, and it had nothing to do with the Woodwards. Once again, the boys were all fighting like gladiators back and forth, and they were threatening each other.
Okay. Were you there when Tim Blake and Roger Picior were having a conversation? Come on, buddy, we'll go now. We're going together. We're going now. Suit up. And a woman's voice says, where? Is that you that's the woman's voice or someone else?
To get cigarettes and beer. And no, it was not my voice.
It's cigarettes and beer.
Yes.
All three of it, get it on, get it on. All three of us, let's go. We're going to end this. That's to get cigarettes and beer.
That's not what was said.
And then a woman's voice yells out, oh my God, they're going to do it. Was that you?
I don't know.
Why would somebody yell out, and, oh my God, you're going to do it if they're getting cigarettes and beer?
Again, there were a bunch of people having different conversations with each other, and the surveillance camera was picking up conversations with other people that didn't even have to do with the Woodwards whatsoever.
Well, you would agree that there had been a number of problems associated with the group that was at your party against the Woodwards for almost a month. Isn't that correct?
Yes.
And there was definitely, no question, a lot of comments directed directly at the Woodwards and Mr. Woodward in particular. Isn't that true? That evening?
No, that evening, no.
That evening, no?
We did not believe he was even home.
Then why are
There were no
people
lights on.
shouting out, plastic G.I. Joe? Wasn't that one of the comments that was directed toward Mr. Woodward?
I did not say that.
You did not say that?
I
Did you
didn't
hear it? You didn't hear it?
Mm-mm.
So if that was being directed toward the Woodwards, you were just unaware of it.
Like I said, the boys were all fighting with each other, amongst each other. Everybody was shouting at each other. There were a couple different not groups, it was one-on-one. There were, I would say at one point, there were 3, because there were 6 boys. And Roger as well. And they were all battling with each other. So they were, talking to each other like guys do, just being boys. Had nothing to do with the Woodwards at all. It was totally taken out of context.
Well, let's start with you saying you were unaware, or you felt your group was unaware that Mr. Woodward was there. Isn't it a fact that as soon as he got home, that's when the conduct against he, in particular, Tim Blake and this little serenade, seconds after he got out of his truck and walked into his home?
I wasn't even aware that he even went home and that nobody told me. I didn't know. I really believed he wasn't there.
Okay. And so it's your feeling that all of these things that were audible, in some cases visible, on the surveillance tape were taken out of context.
Absolutely, 100%.
And so the Woodwards shouldn't have been concerned at all, particularly given the earlier threats to have their daughter raped or their house burned. None of that should have caused them to believe that any of these comments were being directed toward them, right?
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
They should have just understood that you guys were just a bunch of drunks having a good time that thought that it was a good time to yell and scream threats and insults at your neighbors, right?
They were yelling threats and screaming at each other. They were teenage boys, and we were having a barbecue.
Is Roger Picior a teenage boy?
I can't.
Is Roger Picior a teenage boy?
No, sir.
Is
He wasn't.
Gary Hembree a teenage boy?
No, sir.
Is Bruce Timothy Blake a teenage boy?
No.
Are you a teenage boy?
No.
Is Carrie Blake a teenage boy?
No.
So it wasn't just the teenage boys that were involved in this. It was grown men as well as the teenage boys.
Watching the teenage boys fight amongst themselves. Yes, we were all watching the boys beat each other up, and we thought it was funny because we were drinking. And it was the first time we had chilled out in a long time, and we were having a good time.
So it's part of the fun to call people fucking cunts, faggot.
They're boys. They were boys, teenage boys, beating each other up.
Well, let's talk about your memory of if I understood your claims. Well, first of all, so it's your testimony, I think you said it in direct, but it's your position that there were never any words directed at the Woodwards in your presence at all.
That's not what I said.
Okay. What was directed at the Woodwards in your presence then?
Exactly, I could not say.
Now, if I understood your sequence of events, you were saying that you were in the house when you first heard what you believe to be gunshots. Is that correct?
There were gunshots, and yes, I was inside the house.
Okay. Well, I mean, thought you had said, Mr. Hembree told you that you were wrong. It wasn't gunshots, but you were convinced they were gunshots, and ultimately you were correct, right?
Yes, I was.
Okay. And that's what caused you to go out.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Now, have you ever listened or seen the video of the surveillance and listened to the gunshot pattern during this incident?
Just recently, yes.
Okay. Isn't it a fact that basically the first gunshot involving Mr. Woodward, 3747 on the surveillance, there's a gunshot, 4 seconds later a second gunshot, 2 seconds later you can hear a metal object hit the ground, 3 seconds later there's a third gunshot.
Is that a question?
5 seconds later, it's a long question, but I'm going to get through it. 5 seconds later, there are 13 shots, all without a pause. About 30 seconds after that, there are 5 shots without a pause, followed by 10 shots without a pause. The whole time, first
Object to compound question, and it really wasn't a question at all.
haven't finished it yet.
I object to the form of the question. It's compound.
Okay, overruled. You may finish your question.
Thank you. But the whole gunshot sequence took approximately 72 seconds, minute and 12 seconds, from first shot to last shot.
I didn't pay attention that much to it.
Okay.
Honestly, it was disgusting and scary, and I wasn't looking at the time.
Well, let me just, again, you're saying that well, let me ask you this. Isn't it a fact that Mr. Hembree actually sustained 15 wounds during the shooting? Were you aware of that?
No, I was not.
Okay. basically, would you agree that in the gunshot pattern, the last 15 shots would have had to have been directed toward Mr. Hembree if he suffered 15 wounds? Shot directed at Mr. Hembree, and the last shot directed at Mr. Hembree, in fact, the last shot is less than 15 seconds.
Objection as to the form of the question. It assumes the witness had knowledge as to the time she...
If she knows, if she can answer.
I wasn't timing anything.
Okay. Well, in this time period, whatever it was, it's your testimony that you and Mr. Hembree came out of the doorway. You had a conversation with Justin Picior, correct?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Picior, you're saying, was in your carport at that time, and you're asking him where your son was, correct?
He was in my laundry room, which is an independent room at the back of the carport with walls, and I had to go in the doorway. He wasn't in the carport, is
Okay.
what I'm saying.
So he wasn't even in the carport area. He was even further removed. He was in the laundry room when you had this conversation with him.
Yeah, but I didn't move from the doorway.
He's not actually at the Blake residence under a car?
Obviously not if I was talking to him.
Obviously not. And now, if I understood your testimony correctly, once the shots started going, you crawled under your car. Is that correct?
Somehow I wound up under my car.
Okay. Now, do you recognize the scene depicted in these two photographs?
Mr. Eisenberger, those have been marked for identification.
Yeah.
Can you identify what?
I can't. It's defendants L for identification and K for identification.
Thank you.
Okay.
It appears that you're the person being talked to L for identification. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And you're seated at this point in the same area that is some other photographs of that area and K for identification. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yes.
You're seated at what would be the orange bench right next to the blue bench. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Now, did you ever see this partial golf club, broken off golf club, earlier in the evening?
No, I did not.
Did you see how it ended up on that bench by the area where all this occurred?
No.
Did you see who was carrying it or using it, or who had possession of that earlier in the evening?
I don't remember it at all.
Okay. Do you remember seeing any baseball bats?
That night?
Yep.
No.
Okay. So, okay. Can I put you witness?
You may.
You recall saying states 122, 123, and 124 that evening.
I don't even know what I'm looking at. Sorry.
The spike thing.
Okay. It's a spike thing.
Yes, you recall seeing it that evening.
No.
Who had that? If you,
I have no idea.
Okay. Do you have any idea what its purpose is hanging there by the grill?
No. It doesn't look like anything important.
Was there ever a point in time where the police ever searched your home that evening?
I believe they told me I wasn't allowed to go in the home. I wasn't aware that anyone was searching my home.
Okay, did you ever see anybody do that?
No.
Okay. Did you ever see them go into the Picior home, or Picor, however you
That
pronounce
was my home.
Oh, I'm sorry. That was the same home? Okay. Did you ever see them go into the Blake home?
I did not.
Final question that I have for you, ma'am. Have you ever been convicted of a crime involving moral turpitude?
Yes, sir.
How many times?
That I was arrested for
You were convicted of a crime involving moral
one
turpitude?
time.
One time. All right, thank you.
Crime was retail theft,
Yes, sir.
and conviction happened in May of last year.
Yes, sir.
Okay. I want to ask you about, or follow up on some questions that Mr. Eisenmenger was asking. As you're under the car, are you aware who was shot last? In other words, he's asking you to talk about the times and the shootings. And my question is more broad than that. Do you have a recollection the shooting has ended and I know where that last shot went?
No.
Okay. All right. So what you've told us is what you can recall from under that car. Right?
Right.
And your view is looking out from under the car?
And over Gary.
Okay. All right. Are you able to see outside easily?
No.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. You may step down at this time. You are subject to recall.